télé.
See how that works? To stick not in the sentence, you just sandwich ne pas around the verb. Let's see what else Sophie has negative feelings about.
Je n'aime pas l'université. Je n'aime pas les restaurants. Je n'aime pas le cinéma.
As happened with the word je, if our verb starts with a vowel, we abbreviate the word ne. Ne becomes N apostrophe. It's that Elysion thing again.
There are a number of expressions in French which behave in a similar way to ne pas. They are ne jamais, which means never, ne personne, which is nobody or no one, ne plus, which means no longer, no more, or any more, ne rien, which is nothing. We're going to give you some examples with the verb écouter, which means to listen to. You'll learn all the forms of this verb later. For now, just watch and listen to how the negative expressions are used in the sentences.
Never.
Je n'écoute jamais.
No one.
Je n'écoute personne.
Anymore.
Je n'écoute plus.
Nothing.
Je n'écoute rien.
Section C, getting infinitives into the action. The neat thing about these liking and disliking words is that you can use them with actions. You can say that you dislike walking or like eating. All you need to know is the infinitive for the action that you like or dislike.
Écouter. Listen.
J'adore écouter la radio.
Chanter. To sing.
J'aime chanter.
Marcher. To walk.
Je déteste marcher.
Danser, to dance.
J'aime danser.
See, you only need to know the infinitive for the action you like or dislike and just stick it after the verb.
J'aime écouter la radio, mais je déteste écouter le chien.
Section D, gender and definite articles.
One last concept that we have to cover, and that's gender and definite articles.
Well, every noun in French, that's every person, place, or thing, has an assumed gender. The gender of a word has a profound effect on the articles that you use with it. So what are articles? They're those little words that go in front of nouns that let you know how many or which one you're talking about. You know, like a, an, and the.
The only articles we're going to talk about in French right now are the equivalents of the. You might have noticed them hanging around in front of other words we've learned so far. Le, la, les.
Le, la, et les are called definite articles because they refer to a specific object, the car, or the cat, or the washed-up film star.
Use le with masculine nouns. Use la with feminine nouns. Use les with plural nouns, regardless of whether they're masculine or feminine.
But how do you know which is which? Plurals are easy. That's when you have more than one of something. But knowing whether something is masculine or feminine is a little more tricky.
The first thing you should probably do is just try to memorize the nouns with their definite articles. So don't just memorize cinéma, memorize le cinéma.
But if you come across a word and can't remember its gender, there are a few tricks you can use to learn the gender from the structure of the word.
Commonly, words that end in et, ir, sion, and I are feminine, as words that end in ons, et, and ur.
La bicyclette, la lumière, la boulangerie,
La chance,
la préférence,
la journée, la nature.
Words that end in o and most consonants are usually masculine.
Le bureau, le pont, le restaurant.
But that's not completely foolproof. It's usually easier to just memorize the word's gender the first time you come across it.
Watch this conversation carefully and rewind it as many times as you need to be able to follow along and do it yourself. Since we're just beginning, this conversation won't be too long, so don't worry. There may be a few new words, but you should be able to pick up what they mean. If you can't figure out the new words right away, try to guess their meaning from the context in which they're used. You can learn an awful lot that way.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Sophie.
Enchanté, je m'appelle Patrick.
Enchantée, ça va?
Ça va bien, merci. Et toi?
Comme c'est comme ça. Je n'aime pas regarder Baywatch.
Tu aimes regarder la télé?
Oui, mais je préfère la radio.
Ah. Je n'aime pas la radio.
Part 3. Ma famille.
Your family deserves to be known. I mean, you need to be able to talk about them. I mean, yes, gummit, that's where you came from.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Marie. Je suis étudiante. Je suis travailleuse. Je n'aime pas la télé. Ma mère, comme moi, est travailleuse. Mon père, il est paresseux. Il aime les siestes. Il aime aussi regarder la télé pour les matchs de foot.
Vas-y! Oh!
Marie has introduced a bunch of new stuff. She doesn't use just the liking and disliking words, but also brand new verbs altogether. Don't worry, in this part of the tape, you'll learn to do all the stuff that Marie just did, like using the verb être and throwing around adjectives.
Je suis étudiante.
That's a form of a new verb called être, which means to be. In order to use être, you'll have to learn all the subject pronouns as well. So you can say he is, she is, you are, we are, or even they are. Once we teach you how to use être, you'll also need to know more nouns and even adjectives.
Adjectives are fun because they let you start describing things. You can say someone is nice.
Elle est gentille.
Or that your dad is lazy.
Mon père est paresseux.
You're also going to learn how to identify your father, mother, and everyone else in the family.
Finally, we'll teach you about mon et ma, which are possessive adjectives.
Section A. Pronouns of the subject variety.
Well, we're moving into new and uncharted territory now. We've been talking about ourselves the whole time, but we want to be able to talk about others as well. So we have to introduce a few more things. The first topic is pronouns.
You know what pronouns are. They're those words that take the place of nouns, like he, she, it, and they. You've already been introduced to some of the French pronouns, je, tu, and vous, which, as you know, are I and the familiar and formal forms of you. Now we'll teach you he and she, us and they, and it.
The French have words for I and we, as you can see. But when it comes to you, they break things up. You comes in the informal or familiar version, tu, and in the formal or polite version, vous. Use tu whenever you're talking to a single person you know on a first-name basis or someone who is your age or younger. Use vous when you're speaking to a group or when you're speaking to someone you don't know or need to be respectful of, like your friend's grandparents. So, the pronouns are
Je, tu, il, elle, on, nous, vous, il, elle. Okay, the other thing you need to look at is il et elle. These are the French words for he and she. They're accompanied by another word, on. What the heck is that?
On has two general uses. It can be used as a replacement for nous, or it can be used to refer in a grand sense to the public at large, kind of like the English word one.
Nous sommes sur Mars. On parle martienne ici.
So, because on takes the singular form of the verb, just like il and elle, it gets grouped with them on the pronoun charts.
You might also notice that on the chart there are il and elle that have s's. These are the plural forms of he and she.
Let's practice our new words.
Il, elle. Nous.
Je.
Il, elle.
Tu.
There's one more trick to these pronouns, and it applies to the plural forms of il and elle. What happens if you have a group of people or things that is both male and female? You use the male form of the pronoun, so the group is il.
By the way, il et elle can also refer to things, like the word it.
So, instead of saying la fenêtre, you could say elle.
Whether you use il ou elle depends on whether the thing is masculine or feminine. Everything is pretty much hung up on gender, huh?
Section B. The necessity of existence and the verb être.
Être is a useful verb that means to be. That means it's the French equivalent of neat words like am, is, and are.
Whenever you use a verb in English, you're unconsciously choosing a form of the verb to use with whatever subject you're talking about. If I say Bill eats apples, for example, I just kind of automatically choose to say eats instead of eat or is eating. Well, choosing the right form of a verb isn't going to be as easy in French because you haven't been speaking French all your life.
The simplest way to learn when to use each form of a French verb is to memorize which forms go with which pronouns. The process of breaking down the verb and matching it with pronouns is called conjugation. When we conjugate a verb, we list the infinitive above and then put all the pronouns on a chart, like this. Then we put the correct forms of the verb with each pronoun. The best way to learn the verb is to go over the chart again and again until you're sure you know it.
That's enough talking about conjugation. Let's do it to être.
La conjugaison d'être. Je suis, tu es, il est, elle est, on est, nous sommes, vous êtes, ils sont, elles sont. Note the liaison in vous êtes. You usually don't pronounce the S on the ends of words, but this is a case where you do.
One more neat thing about être. A little phrase you want to use a lot is c'est, which is the equivalent of it is. So if you wanted to say, it's me, André, you'd say,
C'est moi, André.
If the it you're talking about is more than one thing, then you use ce sont instead of c'est. Check out this sentence with ce sont. It's the books that you lost.
Ce sont les livres que tu as perdus.
Section C. Adjectives of the descriptive variety. There are three basic uses for être. You can say that something is something else, like my dad is a firefighter. Or you can say that something is somewhere, like we are in France. Or you can just plain describe something, like my brother is lazy.
Mon frère est paresseux.
When you're saying something is something else, all you need to know is the proper form of être and the words for what you're talking about.
If you want to say that something is somewhere, you only need to know the name of the thing and the place you want it to be.
Nous sommes en France.
See how easy that is?
Ils sont en Bretagne.
If you're talking about being in a city instead of a country or region, use à instead of en.
Nous sommes à Paris.
Of course, like every rule you'll run into in a language class, there's a catch. You don't always use en for countries and regions, and you don't always use à for cities. A good exception is saying in the United States, which is aux États-Unis. You would think since it's a country, you would use en, but you don't. So, like we said with the gender of words, there is a general rule, but you're really better off just memorizing things the first time.
Before we move on, we want to teach you one more thing. There's a neat little construction you can use to say someone's house. Just put the word chez in front of their name and you're saying at their house. Here, watch.
Ils sont chez David.
Another way to use être is to describe things.
To describe something, you need to know adjectives. Adjectives, as you probably remember, are words that describe nouns.
The use of adjectives can be confusing. It's a complicated enough subject that we'll talk about it more than once. For now, we'll give you a good grounding in adjectives with some easy ones. Let's start with the lazy brother.
Mon frère est paresseux.
To describe something using être and an adjective, you need to know the adjective you want to use, and you have to make the adjective agree with the subject.
You have to make the gender of the adjective agree with the gender of the thing you're describing. Here, watch.
Mon frère est paresseux. Ma sœur est paresseuse.
Frère is masculine and sœur is feminine, so the adjectives describing them take different forms. With the masculine word frère, we use the EUX ending, and with the feminine noun sœur, we use the EUSE ending. Both paresseux and paresseuse mean the same thing. Technically, they're the same adjective.
When you look an adjective up in a French dictionary, you'll have to look for the masculine form. The trick is knowing how to change them to feminine or plural forms if you need to. We'll teach you that in a few moments.
You'll need to know quite a few adjectives to get by, but we're not going to list a bunch of adjectives now because that would be boring.
What we will do is describe Marie's family a bit, so you can see how some of the words work.
Voilà mon père. Il est grand et beau. Ma mère est intellectuelle. Elle est jolie aussi. Mon frère est paresseux et quelquefois il est cruel aussi.
There are some basic rules for changing adjectives to their feminine forms. We'll make a chart to show you.
If the word ends in a consonant, add E. Ver, verte. If the word ends in L, then you should add L and E. Cruel, cruel. If the word ends in F, then you should replace the F with a VE. Sportif, sportive. If the word ends in S, then you should add an S and an E. Ro, rose. Change E to euse. Heureux, heureuse. If the word ends in E, it doesn't change when you make it feminine. Mas, mas. There are also a couple of oddballs. Beau, the masculine form, changes to belle in the feminine. Long changes to longue.
Mes sœurs sont actives.
If the subject of your sentence is plural, you have to make sure the adjective is plural as well. Again, this is easy. Just make sure you have the right form of the word, either masculine or feminine, and then add S. Neat, huh?
La robe est courte. Les robes sont courtes.
When we talked about plural things, more than one robe, the verb changed from est to sont, and the adjective courte got an S.
That's all the adjectives we're going to do for now. Next, we're going to work on a different form of adjectives, the possessives. Section D, adjectives of the possessive variety.
Ma chambre, mon tapis vert et bleu, et mes plantes vertes.
Oui, ta chambre, ton tapis vert et bleu, et tes plantes vertes.
The meaning of that little gem should be pretty obvious, but in the interest of fairness, we'll let you know what happened. Antoine got a little possessive and pointed out to Patrick all the things that were his, Antoine's, and not Patrick's. Patrick, for his part, agreed and acknowledged that all those things were indeed his.
Mon ordinateur, ma radio, mes oiseaux.
Ton ordinateur, ta radio et tes oiseaux.
We're pounding home the idea of possessives. My is mon, ma, or mes, and your is ton, ta, or te. Use ton, ta, and te with people you know well. You know, the people with whom you would use the word tu.
Which word you use depends on the gender of the word that's being possessed. Use mon and ton with masculine words. Ma and ta are for feminine, and mes and te are for plurals.
Mon ordinateur, ma radio, mes oiseaux.
Ton ordinateur, ta radio et tes oiseaux. Je file.
Oiseaux, in case you didn't notice, are birds. At the end of the conversation, before he leaves, Antoine declares that he's getting the heck out, just like me. Je file.
While we're at it, we're going to just go ahead and show you the rest of the possessive adjectives. They work just like the other possessive adjectives. You just use them with different pronouns.
So, this whole time we've been talking about family members, but we've never taken the time to teach you family member names. That means we're hitting a new section.
Section E, take him home to meet the fam. The easiest way to teach you the names for various family members is just to show you. There's not much explanation necessary.
Je m'appelle Marie. Voilà ma famille. Voilà mon père, il s'appelle Jacques. Ma mère est là, elle s'appelle Virginie. Mon frère Jean est là. Voilà ma sœur Hélène. J'ai un oncle et une tante. Oncle Frédéric et tante Joséphine.
Okay, a little explanation is necessary. Voilà is just a short form of saying, here it is. The other weird thing in there is s'appelle. You know that when you say your name, you say je m'appelle. If you're saying someone else's name, you use the il or elle form of that same expression. Il s'appelle Jacques ou elle s'appelle Virginie. Marie also has one set of grandparents. Let's see them.
Voici mes grands-parents. Mon grand-père s'appelle Jacques, comme mon père. Ma grand-mère s'appelle Marie, comme moi.
Isn't that neat how her family names its members after each other? They're so nice. One word you heard in there, moi, you may have heard before. Use that word to refer to yourself whenever you are not the subject of the sentence. There's one more set of names you have to learn, the words for son and daughter, and husband and wife.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Virginie. Marie est ma fille. Jean est mon fils. Et je suis la femme de Jacques.
Je suis le mari de Virginie.
Here's a chart of the family, just to clear things up a bit.
We have now reached the end of part 3, and that means it's time for a conversation to help reinforce what you learned. This particular conversation is a report about her family that Marie is going to present to us.
Mon père s'appelle Jacques. Il est pompier. Alors, il est musclé. Il est sympa, mais il est un peu paresseux quand il est à la maison. Ma mère s'appelle Virginie. Elle est très active et elle aime faire du sport.
Part 4. Mes Poessessions.
Well, now you know who you are and where you come from, and beyond that, where you are. In Part 4, you'll learn better how to say what you have and to describe your most popular surroundings.
Let's meet Patrick. Patrick is an 18-year-old college student from Reims, but we'll let him tell his own story.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Patrick. J'habite à l'université de Reims. Bienvenue dans ma chambre. Dans ma chambre, il y a une radio, un ordinateur et un tapis vert et bleu.
Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres choses?
Oui, il y a aussi 2 plantes vertes et une affiche de basket. Ma chambre est très intéressante, n'est-ce pas?
There was also a bunch of stuff that he said that we haven't run into yet. Is that really such a surprise?
We're familiar with the first part of the conversation. He said hello and introduced himself. He also let us know where he lives, at the University of Reims. That phrasing isn't very familiar, but it's pretty easy. To say where you live, use the phrase j'habite à.
J'habite à Arlington, Virginia.
J'habite à New Orleans.
J'habite à Carson City.
You probably have the whole j'habite à thing down. So what's that next part of the sentence?
Bienvenue dans ma chambre.
He's just welcoming us to his room. You might have heard the word bienvenue before, especially if you've seen that hit musical, Cabaret.
So, bienvenue dans ma chambre, or welcome to my room. Pay particular attention to ma or my. It'll pop up again soon.
Dans ma chambre, il y a une radio, un ordinateur et un tapis vert et bleu.
Whoa! What was all that weird stuff at the beginning of the sentence?
Dans ma chambre. You heard ma chambre before. It means my room. Dans means in. So, in his room, then there's that crazy il y a thing. Il y a kind of means there is or there are. Makes sense, doesn't it?
Alors, il y a une radio, un ordinateur et un tapis vert et bleu.
The rug, or tapis, is green and blue. As long as we've taught you the words for green and blue, let's just do the rest of the color words.
Section A. Ooh, colors.
Since colors are adjectives, their basic forms are masculine.
Rouge, orange, jaune, vert, bleu, violet, blanc, noir, brune.
When you're using colors with a feminine noun, some of them change. The rule is, if the color ends in an E, you don't change it when it goes feminine. If the color ends in a consonant, add an E to make it feminine. Let's look at the feminine forms of the colors.
Rouge, orange, jaune, vert, bleu, violette, blanche, noire, brune.
The extra U changes the pronunciation of a few, as you heard, and the color white, blanc, changes altogether. For that one, you add an H and an U.
As you can see, some change and some don't. I guess you'll just have to memorize them.
So, Patrick has a tapis rouge et jaune.
Pardon, j'ai un tapis vert et bleu.
Oh yeah, vert et brun.
Vert et bleu.
Whatever. So after we learn about the rug, the announcer says,
Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres choses?
We can assume the announcer was asking if there was anything else.
Oui, il y a aussi...
In French, the word aussi doesn't mean a person from Australia. It means also. Makes sense for Patrick to say, also in my room,
So the rest of the conversation is pretty self-explanatory. It's all stuff we run into before. To make sure you have the conversation down and can duplicate it yourself, you might want to take this chance to rewind and go over it a few times.
Section B. The necessity of having and a verb called avoir.
So we've been talking about the things we have, but we still need to learn the verb that means to have. Wouldn't that be fun to know?
Avoir means to have and is called an irregular verb. It's called that because it doesn't conjugate like any other verb.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Antoine. J'habite à Buffalo avec ma mère et mes frères. J'ai un chat. Ma mère a un oiseau. Et mes frères ont un chien.
Antoine just gave us a pretty good introduction to avoir by letting us know what pets he, his mother, and brothers have. But that's not the only way you can use avoir. You can also use it to express idioms about how people feel and how old they are.
Salut, c'est encore Patrick. J'ai 18 ans. J'ai faim. Et Valérie et Hélène, elles ont faim parce qu'il est midi. Nous avons soif aussi.
Isn't that neat? Patrick just told us that because it's noon, he's hungry, Valérie et Hélène are hungry, and that they're all thirsty. All of that from avoir. Don't you want to learn avoir?
La conjugaison du verbe avoir. J'ai, tu as, il a, elle a, on a, nous avons, vous avez, ils ont, elles ont.
You'll notice that whenever the pronouns end with s, they form a liaison with the proper form of avoir. That's just the French making sure everything sounds good. An important thing to notice is that when the liaison is made with one s, like in elles ont, the s makes a z sound. Generally in French, single s's make a z sound, and two s's make the snake sound.
The neat thing about avoir is that there are lots of little phrases that go with it that mean really useful things.
You can say how old you are and whether you